After 15 days in the hospital, I came back to find my daughter-in-law standing in the doorway, saying coldly, "My parents have moved in now. You'd better not make them feel uncomfortable." I just smiled. "Enjoy it while you can." A week later, the blow I'd been holding back in silence left them all in shock. "I'm glad you're here. Stick around to the end, and let me know in the comments what city you're watching my story from. I want to know how far it's reached." I was sitting in the back of the taxi, my back aching and my hands trembling as I clutched my old cloth purse. 15 days laid up after a hip replacement surgery had left me drained. During those endless days in that white hospital room, all I dreamed of was returning to my home, the place my husband, William, and I had built with so much effort. But no one came for me. Not a single call, not a word of comfort from Michael, my son, or from Jessica, my daughter-in-law. I handled my own discharge paperwork, packed my things, and called a cab myself. My heart was heavy, but I kept telling myself, "They're probably just busy. I'm sure they're waiting for me at home." "What's the address, ma'am?" the driver asked in a monotone voice. "Number 14, Magnolia Lane," I replied, trying to sound calm. "The White House with the green fence." He nodded without another word. I looked out the window, watching the familiar streets of our suburban Ohio town pass by. Every corner, every tree brought back memories. When William and I used to take Michael to school, or those afternoons sitting under the rosebush in the garden, laughing as a family. Now William was gone, leaving just Michael and his little family. I hoped, even just a little, that they would welcome me with a hug, or at least a smile. The taxi pulled up in front of the house. I saw the gate was ajar, not locked as it usually was. In the driveway sat an unfamiliar black SUV, parked right where Michael used to leave my granddaughter Lily's bicycle. I felt a sense of foreboding, but I pushed it aside, thinking maybe they had visitors. I paid the driver. I got out, stumbling with my bag in hand. The pain from the surgery still shot through me. Every step felt like lead. I pushed open the gate, crossed the yard, and stood before the familiar wooden front door. I knocked gently, waiting. The door swung open. Michael was standing there, tall, his face serious. His eyes, the same ones that used to look at me with a son's affection, now only showed distance. I smiled weakly, trying to hide the pang in my chest. "I'm home, Michael," I said, my voice hoarse with fatigue. He didn't move, no smile, no hug. "You can't come in here," he said flatly, as if speaking to a stranger. I froze, as if I'd been slapped. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice trembling, praying I had misheard. I took a step forward, trying to get past him, but Michael blocked the way. Then I saw Jessica behind him, holding Lily in her arms. Her eyes scanned my body from head to toe, as if sizing up an old piece of furniture. Then she turned her face and shouted with her chin held high, "Dad, Mom, come on out." From the living room, Richard Davis, Jessica's father, emerged with a glass of wine in his hand, walking as if he owned the place. Behind him came Barbara, her mother, with her arms crossed and a twisted smile that chilled me to the bone. I still didn't understand what was happening when Jessica spoke in an icy voice. "As of today, my parents live here. You'd better not make them uncomfortable. From now on, you no longer live in this house." Her words were like a knife straight to my heart. I looked at her with fury and then glanced over her shoulder into the house. Near the garage, cardboard boxes were stacked high. On each one, written in black marker, were the initials C.M.W. My name, Carol Marie Wallace. My things, the memories William and I had collected over a lifetime, tossed outside like trash. I gripped the door handle tightly, fighting not to break down. "This is my house," I said, my voice choked. "I put my blood, sweat, and tears into building it. You have no right." Barbara stepped closer, her tone mocking. "We've already taken care of everything for you. Your things are already outside. Now, don't be a bother." I looked into her eyes, searching for a shred of humanity, but I only found contempt. Michael, my son, the boy I had held, whose hand I had taken on difficult days, was right there, and he pushed me away from the door, without a word, without a hint of doubt. Jessica chimed in, her voice like ice. "Don't insist. You can't come back here." Lily, the The little one, just 3 years old, began to wail in her mother's arms. Her cries tore at my soul. I wanted to reach out and hold her, to tell her that her grandmother was here, that I would never leave her alone, but Jessica carried her inside, slamming the door shut. Michael looked at me as if for the last time, his eyes empty, and then he turned away. The heavy wooden door closed in front of me. The slam echoed as if my entire world had been sealed shut. I stood paralyzed on the threshold, the late afternoon sun falling on the boxes piled by the garage. The slam of the door still echoed in my head, like a hammer shattering what little was left of my heart. Mrs. Gable, the neighbor who had lived next door for over 20 years, walked by slowly. She stopped, looked at me with pity, as if she wanted to say something, but just shook her head and continued on her way. I wanted to call out to her, to ask if she knew anything, but my throat closed up and I couldn't speak. I was left there, alone, with the boxes containing my entire life thrown out like garbage. I dragged my feet over to the boxes. I fell to my knees, and with trembling hands, I opened one. Inside, my clothes were jumbled together, mixed with family photo frames and small trinkets. A porcelain bowl, a wedding gift from my mother, lay there, its rim chipped. I picked it up, my fingers tracing the crack, and felt the pain expand in my chest. It wasn't just an object, it was memories, the days and nights William and I had shared building our life. I clutched the bowl to my chest as tears streamed down my face. "Why, Michael? Why?" I whispered, but only the wind answered. Suddenly, the front door creaked open. I looked up with a glimmer of hope, thinking Michael had come to his senses, that he would run to me, hug me, apologize, tell me it was all a misunderstanding. But no, he just stood there, avoiding my gaze, and tossed a bundle of papers onto the steps. "This is the power of attorney agreement. You signed it yourself," he said in a cold, emotionless voice. "Everything is legal, so don't even think about making a scene." With trembling hands, I picked up the papers, flimsy yet heavy as a stone on my chest. My signature was there, clear, the same one I had signed hundreds of times. But looking at them closely, I froze as I remembered signing them in the hospital, before the surgery, when I could barely sit up. Jessica had given them to me, smiling sweetly, telling me they were insurance forms so the hospital could cover the expenses. "Just sign these, Carol. I'll take care of everything," she had said, her voice as sweet as honey, and I believed her. I put my signature down without reading a single line, because I thought she was my daughter-in-law, that she was family. The paper clearly stated, "Power to transfer all assets and finances to Michael Wallace and Jessica Davis. The house on Magnolia Lane, the money I had saved my entire life, everything William and I had built with so much effort, now belonged to them." I looked up and saw Richard in the doorway, shrugging as if it were all obvious. "See? It's all legal," he said in a slick, salesman-like tone. "You have nothing to do with this house anymore." Barbara, Jessica's mother, was behind him, shaking her head with an air of pity, but in her eyes, cold and filled with contempt, was the truth. She didn't feel sorry for me. She was mocking me, an old, weak woman, betrayed by her own son. I tried to stay strong, but my voice trembled when I asked, "And what about my savings? Without money, how am I supposed to live?" I looked directly at Michael, hoping he would at least speak up, say something to defend his mother. But Michael just lowered his head, silent, like a shadow. Jessica reappeared, no longer holding Lily, walking confidently like someone who had won a battle. "You're no longer capable of managing your finances," she said, her voice sharp as a knife. "That's why we decided to hold on to that money for the good of the family." The good of the family? Those words from her mouth were like another slap. Family to me meant dinners together, Lily's laughter as I pushed her on the swing in the garden. And what did it mean to her to take everything I had? Richard clapped Michael on the shoulder, signaling for him to close the door. I looked at him, pleading for even a sign, a flicker of regret, anything that would remind me of the son I once loved. But he just bowed his head and pushed the door until it was shut. The slam echoed, cutting off the last spark of hope within me. I hugged the cardboard box tightly, feeling the whole world crashing down on me. My legs gave out. The pain from the surgery shot through me, but nothing compared to the pain in my heart. I had lost the house, the money, and now my only son. I dragged my feet to the corner, the cold evening wind drying the tears on my cheeks. I called a taxi, my voice so hoarse the driver had to ask, "What was that, ma'am?" "Take me to a small hotel, anyone," I replied, too exhausted to think anymore. As the car pulled away, I turned to look at the house one last time. The green fence, the wooden door, and the rose bushes in the garden, all of it was now just a memory. The taxi stopped in front of a small hotel in the center of town. The neon lights flickered over a dim sign that read, "Magnolia Royal." I stumbled out, clutching the cardboard box that held the broken pieces of my life, my legs still shaking from the shock of being thrown out by my own son and his wife. The driver looked at me with a bit of curiosity, but I just nodded in thanks and went on my way. I didn't want anyone to see me cry. I didn't want pity from anyone. I had already lost too much, but my pride was the last thing I had left. At the front desk, I got the key to my room, a small space on the 3rd floor. The clerk, a young man with a kind smile, saw me struggling with my hospital bag and the cardboard box and rushed to help. "Let me get that for you, ma'am," he said, his voice full of youthful energy. I managed a weak smile, feeling a small warmth in my chest from this unexpected kindness in the middle of my life's storm. When the room door closed, I set the box on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed as a wave of exhaustion washed over me. The small room, with its beige-painted walls and a faint smell of disinfectant, was a stark reminder that I was now a stranger in my own life. I opened the box, my hands trembling as I took out what was inside. An old photo appeared, taken at my wedding to William, more than 30 years ago. His radiant smile, his jacket a little too big in the shoulders, and my eyes sparkling with hope for a happy future. The corner of the photo was torn, just like my own heart at that moment. I placed the photo on the table, caressed it gently, and whispered, "William, if you were here, what would you do?" But only silence answered. I picked up my cell phone, took a deep breath, and dialed the number of Helen Grant, the only friend I still trusted, the one who had promised she would always be by my side, no matter what. "Carol, what's wrong?" Helen's voice came through on the other end of the line, warm but full of concern. I could also hear her hurried footsteps, as if she could already sense that something was terribly wrong. "Can you come to the Magnolia Royal Hotel, room 128, right now?" I said, trying to stay calm. "Don't forget to bring the folder I gave you last year." She didn't ask any more questions, just replied firmly, "I'm on my way." That decisiveness in her voice made me feel like a spark of light had just been lit in the darkness. An hour later, Helen appeared with her old leather briefcase in hand. She entered the room, set it on the table, unlatched it, and pulled out a bank folder that I had entrusted to her last year, after William passed away. "Carol, I had the bank review this," she said in a firm voice, though her eyes reflected unease. "There were illegal withdrawals while you were in the hospital. Over $250,000 is missing. What happened?" I felt a lump in my throat and had to sit down to keep from falling. $250,000. The money that William and I had saved our entire lives, from the days of hard work at his construction company, the sleepless nights taking care of Michael when he was sick, the times we skipped meals to buy him books, it was all gone. I told her everything, every painful detail, the door slamming shut in my face, the stacked boxes, and Jessica's cold words saying I was no longer fit to manage my finances. Every word I spoke was like a stab to the heart. But I had to talk. I had to make Helen understand that I had been betrayed by my own family. Helen listened without interrupting, but I noticed how her hands gripped the edge of the table and her eyes blazed with fury. When I finished, she sat down across from me and said with a confident voice, "So they not only took the house, they also emptied your accounts. Did Michael have your bank PIN?" I nodded, my throat dry. "I asked him to change the password for me every so often since William died. I thought since he was my son, I could trust him." My voice broke and the tears started falling again. I had given everything to Michael because I trusted he would take care of me, just as I had taken care of him all those years. And yet, he used that trust to steal everything from me. Helen opened her laptop, typed quickly, and then turned the screen towards me. A list of bank transactions appeared, large sums transferred to a company called Davis Investments. "This company is registered in Richard Davis's name," Helen said, pointing a finger at the screen. It's not a coincidence, Carol. After doing some research, I discovered the Davis family has been buying up a lot of properties lately, all in your neighborhood. I gripped the edge of the table, my nails digging into the wood. Magnolia Lane, where I had lived for more than 30 years, where I knew the name of every neighbor, every tree. Those houses weren't just real estate, they were the lives of people like Mrs. Miller and Mr. Peterson, who had shared joys and sorrows with me for so many years. What had they done to end up in this dirty game? What do they want? I asked, my voice trembling with rage. They took my house, my money, and now the whole neighborhood too? Helen handed me a bottle of water. Her gaze softened, though it remained firm. We're not going to let them, but first we need to understand their whole game. The next morning, as the sun was just rising, I was already sitting in Helen's car, heading to the county records office downtown. I had barely slept that night, my head spinning with memories of Michael, Jessica, and the contemptuous looks from Richard and Barbara. But the pain was beginning to give way to determination. I was no longer the weak woman who stood silently at her own front door. I had to fight, not just for myself, but also for neighbors like the Millers, who were being dragged down by the Davises' greed. Helen drove, focused on the road, but every now and then she'd flash me an encouraging smile. "We're going to find out the truth today, Carol," she said firmly. I nodded, clutching the old cloth bag where I kept William's picture, as if it were a good luck charm. The records office was in an old building, with pale yellow walls and an air thick with the smell of old paper and ink. Helen showed her attorney's ID, exchanged a few words with a familiar clerk, and we were shown into a small room where a thick file was already waiting for us on the table. The clerk, a middle-aged man with round glasses, pushed the file towards us. "These are all the real estate transactions on Magnolia Lane over the past year," he said in a monotone voice. I opened the file. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. Sales contracts appeared one after another, all with Davis Investments as the buyer. I stopped abruptly when I saw the shaky signature of Mrs. Miller. I remembered her sad eyes the day they threw me out, when she mumbled that she would have to move soon. "They tricked her," I said in a broken voice. "Mrs. Miller would never sell her house if she knew the truth." Helen tapped the table gently with her fingers, her gaze sharp. "I did some research online last night," she said. "It seems they're buying up land because they expect the city to approve a new development plan. If it's authorized, the value of the land will multiply by 10. Her words were like a lightning bolt cutting through the fog in my head. It wasn't just my house. It was a much larger scheme, targeting the entire Magnolia Lane community. I clenched my fist, my nails digging into my palm. "Then we have to stop them," I replied, with more firmness than I expected, "before they make it all legal." On the way back from the office, Helen's phone rang. She answered with a serious tone. "John, is there anything new?" On the other end was John Peterson, a mid-level official at the city planning department who had been in the same law school class as Helen. "Davis Investments is applying for a permit to build a shopping mall," John said, his voice low but hurried. "The file is pending approval. If they get it, they'll have total control of the land." Helen frowned and glanced at me. "Thanks, John. Keep in touch." She hung up and turned to me. "If they get approved, you'll lose any chance of getting anything back, Carol." Her words hit me like a bucket of cold water. I thought I was ready to face the truth, but the idea of losing the house forever squeezed my heart. That house wasn't just a place to live. It was the shelter for my memories with William, with Michael as a child, with the days we laughed together in the rose garden. I couldn't let them take everything from me. "What do we do then?" I asked, my voice trembling but determined. That afternoon, we sat in a crowded coffee shop downtown. The aroma of freshly roasted coffee mixed with the buzz of conversations. But I was only focused on Helen's laptop screen. She pulled up a family tree of the Davis family and pointed to each name. "It looks like Jessica is the one calling the shots," she said. "She has a degree in economics. She worked at a big real estate firm before marrying Michael. Richard and Barbara are just the front. They're on the paperwork, but Jessica is the one designing the whole plan." I fell silent, her image burned into my mind. I remembered the moment she stood at my door with Lily in her arms, kicking me out without a second thought, without a hint of remorse. I also remembered when she came to the hospital. She put a stack of documents in front of me, and smiled sweetly. "Sign here, Mom. It's just an insurance application." At that moment, I was so weak I couldn't read. I trusted her and signed, and now I understood. It was a planned trap from the start. "She deceived me," I said, a lump in my throat. I treated her like a daughter. Helen placed a hand on my shoulder. Her gaze was soft but firm. "If you're okay with it, I can contact Detective Miller," she said. "I know him from a previous case. He's reliable, and I suspect their plan goes beyond just taking your house. But you have to be ready, Carol. Being the main witness isn't easy." I looked her straight in the eye, feeling a flame ignite in my chest. "I want to get everything back," I replied without hesitation. "The house, the assets, and also justice for my neighbors. I'm not going to let them hurt anyone else." Helen smiled with pride. "Then let's get started." That night, I returned to the hotel room, which was already starting to feel more familiar. I sat at the table, opened an old notebook, and began to write down every detail I could remember about Michael, Jessica, Richard, and Barbara. I noted every time they talked about money, every strange look from Jessica when she asked about my accounts, every visit from Richard and Barbara with their air of superiority. I remembered one night, months ago, when Jessica was at the dining room table, scrolling on her phone and murmuring with Michael about a big opportunity. At the time, I thought they were talking about business. Today, I understood that was when they had started laying the trap for me. When I finished writing, I closed the notebook and took William's photo out of my bag. I lit a small candle and placed it next to his portrait. The flickering light illuminated his kind face, as if he were looking at me, giving me comfort. "If you can see me, please give me strength," I whispered, tears running down my cheeks. I remembered the words he used to say when he was alive. "Carol, you're stronger than you think. Never let anyone tear you down." I clenched my fist. I took a deep breath. I wasn't going to be torn down. Not today. Not ever. The next night, as the faint moonlight streamed through the hotel window and fell upon the table where I sat, my hands trembled as I held the bracelet Helen had just given me. It looked like an ordinary piece of jewelry, but inside it held a tiny hidden microphone, so skillfully concealed that I had to look closely to even notice it. Helen stood before me, her expression serious but full of confidence. "Carol, this plan is dangerous," she said in a grave voice. "You're going to go into the house, see if the Davis family lets anything slip. But don't let them suspect a thing. If you see any risk, press this button." She pointed to a small dot on the bracelet. "The signal will go straight to me and Detective Miller." I nodded, swallowing the lump of fear in my throat. The thought of going back to that house, the place I once called home, now taken over by con artists, made my heart pound. But I had no other choice. I had to find evidence. I had to expose their plan, not just for me, but also for neighbors like Mrs. Miller, whom they were driving to despair. I put on a loose coat, hid the bracelet under the sleeve, and looked at Helen. "I'm ready," I said, though inside I wasn't sure I had the courage. Around midnight, I rented an old car from a driver I knew from the corner. I asked him to drop me off at the end of Magnolia Lane, where the dim light from the street lamps barely illuminated anything. My house appeared in the darkness, the living room still lit, and Richard's black SUV parked in front of the gate, like a provocation. I took a deep breath, got out of the car, feeling like I was entering a battle I didn't know if I could win. Following Detective Miller's instructions, I went down the alley that led to the backyard, the same way Michael used to sneak in when he was a teenager and forgot his keys. Back then, I'd scold him for being careless, but now that same path was my only way to justice. The back door to the kitchen was slightly ajar, just enough for me to hear voices from inside. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to hold my breath. Inside, Richard was sitting at the dining table with a thick stack of documents in front of him. He was speaking in a calculating tone. "The name Carol Wallace will give us access to a $300,000 line of credit. With one more forged signature, the bank won't suspect a thing." Barbara, beside him, raised her wine glass and nodded with a mocking smile. "She's useless now," she said with contempt. "A few more signatures, and we'll have everything." My blood boiled, but I forced myself to stay calm. I slid my hand to the bracelet and pressed the record button. A faint click sounded, and I prayed it was enough to capture every word. What they were saying felt like daggers to the heart, but it was also the proof I needed. I stood motionless, holding my breath, listening to every sentence. Suddenly, Richard's cell phone rang. He put it on speaker, and Jessica's voice filled the room, cold but with a hint of nervousness. "Dad, Michael is still having second thoughts. I told him there's no turning back, but he keeps saying he doesn't want to hurt his mom." "I'll handle him," Richard growled. His hand slammed the table. "He has no right to choose, Jessica. Force him to do it. If he betrays us, we'll throw him away just like we've done with the others." His words chilled me to the bone. Who were the others? How many more people had been destroyed by them? Like Mrs. Miller? Like me? And Michael? My son? Were they forcing him, or had he truly chosen their side? I wanted to believe he wasn't doing it on purpose, that somewhere inside him there was still a conscience, but the pain inside me didn't leave much room for hope. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest, trying to record every word they said. But as I turned to leave, my foot tripped on a small planter in the backyard. A crack sounded in the darkness, faint but enough to break the silence. Richard spun around, his sharp gaze, like a knife, slicing through the crack in the door. "Who's there?" he shouted, his voice thick with menace. I panicked. I scrambled back towards the exit, but my legs, still weak from the surgery, were slower than I wanted. Before I could escape, Richard burst out. His huge hand grabbed my wrist, squeezing so hard I had to bite my lip to keep from screaming. "You dared to come back, Carol?" he snarled, his eyes burning. The smell of alcohol on his breath hit me, making me want to recoil, but he held me tight, giving me no chance to escape. The pain in my wrist spread, sharp and throbbing, as if Richard wanted to crush my bones. He squeezed harder, dragging me into the living room, his gaze blazing with threat. "Do you want to die, Carol?" he roared, his voice low and sharp as a razor. Barbara was behind him, her face pale, the wine glass trembling in her hand, but she didn't intervene. She just watched me like a trapped animal. I gritted my teeth, trying to twist my wrist to press the signal button on the bracelet Helen had given me. My fingers reached the button, but I didn't know if I had activated it or not. In that instant, all I could do was pray that Helen and Detective Miller received the signal before things got worse. Richard raised his hand, ready to strike. I closed my eyes, bracing for the pain. But just then, the sound of a police siren blared in the street, sharp and piercing, tearing through the night. The flashing red and blue lights flickered through the window, illuminating Barbara's terrified face. The wineglass slipped from her hands, shattering on the carpet, the red liquid spreading like blood. Richard let go of me, took a step back, his eyes anxiously searching for an exit. Before he could react, the front door burst open. Detective Miller stormed in, followed by 2 police officers, guns drawn, his cold voice echoing, "Don't move, hands in the air." I stood there, my heart pounding and my legs trembling, but no longer from fear, from relief. They had come. The signal had worked. Richard took another step back, raising his hands, though his eyes remained cold, calculating a way out. Barbara shrieked, her voice high-pitched. "What are you doing here? This is our house." But Miller ignored her. He signaled for an officer to approach and handcuff Richard. The metallic click echoed as the cuffs snapped shut on his wrists, and I felt a huge weight lift from my chest. I pointed to the stack of documents on the dining table. My voice trembled, but it came out clear. "The proof is right there. I have recordings, too." An officer approached, carefully collected the documents, and placed them in a security bag. I looked at those papers, remembering the forged signatures, the conspiracies hatched in the very house I had built with my own sweat and tears. Each paper was like a stab wound, but now they would become the weapon with which I would reclaim justice. In the midst of the chaos, a figure appeared on the staircase. Michael, my son, stood there in his wrinkled pajamas, his face pale as if he still didn't understand what was happening. He looked at me, standing in the living room, and then at his in-laws being led away in handcuffs. His eyes widened in confusion, like a child caught doing something forbidden. I stared at him, saying nothing. My heart hurt as if it were being torn apart. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he had betrayed me, why he had allowed them to kick me out of my own home. But I held back. I stood there, with the same coldness he had shown me that day they threw me out. Miller gave the order. "Take them to the car. 2 of you stay and watch the house." 2 officers escorted Richard and Barbara outside, their footsteps mixing with the echo of the sirens. Barbara was still struggling, shouting, "You have no right, we didn't do anything wrong." But Richard remained silent, his gaze lowered, as if he knew his game was over. I stood still, watching them being taken away, feeling as though a hurricane had passed, leaving me in a painful calm. Helen appeared at the front door, walked quickly to me, and put a hand on my shoulder. "Carol, you did great," she said with a warm, proud voice. "From now on, things will be different." I nodded, though deep down I wasn't sure if that was true. I watched the red and blue lights flash in the yard and listened as the patrol cars drove away. It was a victory, I knew. But why did I feel so heavy inside? I had gotten the house back, at least for now. But what about Michael? My son, who had been everything to me, was just a few steps away and yet as distant as an ocean. I looked at him again. He was still on the stairs, hands clutching the railing, his gaze lost somewhere between me and the floor. "Mom," he murmured in a hoarse voice, but said nothing more. I wanted to go to him, to hug him like when he was a child, to tell him that I loved him despite everything. But I couldn't. The pain of betrayal was too great, like an open wound. I just shook my head and turned away, leaving him there, trapped in his own silence. Miller returned and looked at me seriously, though with some compassion. "Mrs. Wallace, we'll need you to be the main witness," he said. "What you recorded and this file will be key evidence, but I warn you, this case may be more complicated than we think." I nodded, my voice firm. "I'm ready. I want them to pay, not just for me, but for all the people they've hurt." As I left the house, I turned one last time. The living room, where I used to tell Michael stories, where William would laugh out loud playing cards with his friends, was now just a cold, dark space. I walked through the door. The streetlight illuminated my face, mixing with the tears I couldn't hold back. Helen took my hand and led me to her car. "You were very brave, Carol," she said. "William would be proud of you." I didn't answer, just looked out the window as Magnolia Lane disappeared into the darkness. I knew this was just the beginning. The Davis family's network had been partially exposed, but there were still Michael, Jessica, and other hidden secrets. The next morning, the dim light entering through Helen's car window illuminated my face without managing to erase the chill inside me. I remained silent, hugging the old cloth bag where I kept William's photo, the only thing I had left of those happy days. Helen drove, occasionally glancing at me, with concern but also with determination. "Today won't be easy, Carol," she said in a grave voice. "But you've come this far. Let's finish this." I nodded, without speaking, but deep down I knew I couldn't turn back. Not after everything I had been through. We arrived at the detective's office in town, a gray building with long corridors and the echoing sound of footsteps. Detective Miller was waiting for us in a small room, with a map of the Magnolia Lane neighborhood spread out on the table. He pointed to the red marks that identified each house already transferred to Davis Investments. "They didn't just deceive you, Mrs. Wallace," Miller said, his voice serious but filled with indignation. "This is an organized fraud ring. They've targeted dozens of people in the neighborhood, taking advantage of trust and lack of information to steal houses and land. We need to stop this entire network." I looked at the map. The red marks looked like bleeding wounds on the neighborhood I had once loved. Each mark was a story, a family pushed to despair. I thought of Mrs. Miller, of her sad gaze when she talked about having to move. I thought of Mr. Peterson, the neighbor who used to bring me donuts for every holiday. They were all victims, just like me. "I'll help," I said firmly. Miller slid a cooperation agreement form towards me. I signed my name. Each stroke was a promise that I would not let them hurt anyone else. In the afternoon, a convoy of police cars quietly approached the Magnolia Lane neighborhood. I was in Miller's car, my heart pounding as I saw my house appear in the distance. The green iron gate was still there, but it was no longer the entrance to a home, but to the battlefield I had to face. Miller looked at me and spoke in a serious tone. You will go with us to identify the property and the people inside. If at any moment you don't feel well, just say so. I nodded, trying to stay calm, although inside I knew I was about to face the most painful part. Watching Michael and Jessica get arrested. When the car stopped, I saw Michael on the porch, biting his nails with a nervous gesture. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken, as if he hadn't slept in days. Looking at him, my heart sank. He was the son I had raised, whom I had loved more than myself, but he was also the one who remained silent when they threw me out of the house. The one who said nothing when Jessica declared that I no longer belonged there. I wanted to run to him, to ask him why, but I held back, forcing myself to stand tall, not letting my emotions overcome me. The front door burst open. Jessica came out carrying Lily in her arms, with the same confident expression as always. But upon seeing me, sitting in the car next to the police, that confidence crumbled. Her eyes widened in surprise, then blazed with fury. "What the hell is she doing here?" she screamed, her high-pitched voice echoing in the yard. How dare she betray the family? That word from her mouth drew a bitter laugh from me. Family? A family doesn't kick a mother-in-law out of her house, doesn't take everything she has. I got out of the car, straightened my back, and looked her straight in the eye. Family, for me, ceased to exist the moment you slammed the door in my face that day, I said in a calm but cutting voice. My words were like a knife. I saw her step back, hugging Lily tighter. Miller gave a signal, and 2 officers moved to restrain Jessica. She struggled, screaming, "You have no right. I'm a mother of a little girl." But the click of the handcuffs cut her off. The neighbors began to gather around the house. The murmurs and pointing grew into a chaotic buzz. My little Lily cried inconsolably as she was separated from her mother. An officer gently took her and led her to another car heading to Child Protective Services. Her cries tore my soul apart. I wanted to run, to hug her, to promise I would protect her, but I couldn't. Not at that moment. I stood still, watching her tiny silhouette disappear behind the car door. Michael was still there, on the porch step, like a stone statue. His gaze was lost, shifting between me and the police. When one of them approached and put the cuffs on him, I saw his shoulders tremble, as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. My heart tore. This was the son I had given birth to, whom I had hugged, for whom I had sacrificed my entire life. And now he was there, handcuffed like a criminal, and I could do nothing to change it. I turned away, not wanting him to see my tears, not wanting him to know that, despite everything, I still loved him. The crowd of neighbors was growing larger. The murmurs were getting louder. Mrs. Miller approached me. With trembling hands, she took mine. "Thank you, Carol," she whispered, her eyes full of tears. "You did what we didn't dare to do. You saved the whole neighborhood." I just nodded, unable to speak, my throat tight. I looked around and saw familiar faces. Mr. Peterson, Diane Fisher, the people who had lived beside me for so many years. They all looked at me with gratitude mixed with sadness. They knew what I had lost to get to this day. I got into the car with Miller, my heart still pounding as the siren echoed down Magnolia Lane. Half an hour later, I was sitting in the cold room at the police headquarters. Detective Miller stood in front of the desk and dropped a thick folder. The dull thud made me jump. "We found this in Richard Davis's safe," he said in a grave but sharp voice, as if he too was trying to contain his anger. I looked down. With trembling hands, I opened the folder and felt my heart stop when I recognized they were copies of my medical records. Every day I spent in intensive care, every prescribed medication, every doctor's note, everything was there, noted with precision, like a diary of my days fighting pain and fragility. "How did they get this?" I asked in a broken voice, feeling as if someone was squeezing my throat. Miller pushed another stack of papers towards me, his expression stern. "There's evidence that Nurse Susan Martin, who attended to you during your recovery, received money from Jessica," he said. "She deliberately altered your medication doses, causing a mild infection to keep you hospitalized longer." His words were like an explosion in my head. I felt dizzy. I had to grip the edge of the desk to keep from collapsing. The memories of those days in the hospital came flooding back. The times Susan would come and give me an injection without looking me in the eye, always in a hurry, as if she wanted to flee. I had thought she was just busy, but she was actually part of the plot. I turned the pages, my heart racing, until I found a life insurance policy. The date of the beneficiary change was 6 months ago, and the beneficiary was Michael Wallace, my son. My signature appeared clearly on the document, but the crooked, shaky handwriting was not my usual one. "That's not my signature," I whispered, my voice choked. I looked at Miller, hoping he would say it was a mistake, but he just nodded with compassion in his eyes. "We suspect this signature was forged," he said, "and this is no longer just a matter of property." Helen, sitting beside me, slammed the table hard, making the papers vibrate. "This is no longer theft," she said angrily. "This is a murder plot to collect an insurance policy." Her words were like a knife piercing my chest. I closed my eyes, trying to breathe, but the image of Michael returned to my mind. His lost look when he was handcuffed the day before. His gaunt face as if he carried an unbearable weight. Could he have known about this plan? Is it possible that my own son, the son I loved my whole life, was involved in such a heinous conspiracy? Miller nodded, his voice grave but firm. "We will open a new criminal file, and Michael will also be investigated." I sat motionless, feeling as if the entire world was crumbling beneath my feet. Michael, the son who once took my hand, crying inconsolably when he was bullied at school, the one who would laugh out loud when I baked him a cake on his birthday. Now he was being investigated for a plot that could have ended my life. I wanted to scream, to run to him, to ask him why, but I just sat there, my hands covering my face as the tears fell silently. At that moment, a police officer rushed in, his voice filled with urgency. "We just arrested Susan Martin at the hospital. She's being questioned." Miller nodded and looked at me. "Mrs. Wallace, what you gave us, the recording, the file, has brought us closer to the truth. But I need you to be prepared. This spiral of crimes is deeper than we think." I nodded, although inside I felt like I was sinking into a bottomless pit. Every finding was a new wound, and I didn't know how many more I could bear. Helen put a hand on my shoulder, her voice firm but warm. "Carol, they want to turn you into a silent victim, but now you're the one who has unmasked them." I looked into her eyes and saw in them confidence and determination. She was right. They had tried to push me into the darkness, but I would not stay silent. I wiped my tears, took a deep breath. "I will do whatever is necessary," I said, my voice hoarse but firm. "They have to pay." On the way out of the police headquarters, I was in Helen's car, looking out the window. The streets of town passed before my eyes, but I didn't really see anything. In my mind, the memories of the hospital swirled. I remembered the days confined to bed, so weak I couldn't even sit up. I remembered Jessica coming in with flowers and a fake smile, offering words of comfort while she wove her trap behind my back. I remembered Susan, with that evasive look every time she gave me an injection. Everything was planned, step by step, to take my assets and maybe my life. A few days after the raid, I was in the hotel room when the phone vibrated. Helen's voice came through on the other end, grave but clear. "Carol, Michael has been placed in preventive detention, pending investigation. He wants to see you." Her words tightened my chest. "See Michael? The son who watched me get thrown out of my own house. The same one whose name appeared on a forged life insurance policy. The one I no longer knew if I could still trust." I fell silent, gripping the phone tightly, and whispered, "I'll go." That morning, I found myself in front of the detention center, a gray building with high walls and a barbed wire fence. The cold wind made me shiver, but it wasn't because of the weather. I was terrified to face Michael, to look him in the eye and find the answer to the question that haunted me. "Why did you do this, son?" But I knew I couldn't run away. I needed to hear him out. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful. The metal door opened with a dry creak that echoed in the silent hallway. Michael was sitting at the table, his head bowed, his hands cuffed over his legs. The gray inmate uniform made him look small, fragile, very different from the tall man who had closed the door in my face that day. I sat across from him, separated only by a worn wooden table. The room was silent, just the ceiling fan turning with a constant hum, as if counting the seconds. I looked at him, waiting. Inside, I was a whirlwind of rage, pain, and a tiny spark of hope that, somewhere deep down, there was still something left of the son I had loved. Michael looked up, his eyes red, his voice hoarse. "Mom, I messed up. Forgive me. I'm truly sorry." His words were like a dagger in my heart. I wanted to scream, to ask him why he could do that to me, but I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. He lowered his head, his hands trembling in the shackles. "I'm in debt, Mom," he said, his voice choked. "I failed in a real estate investment, lost all the money, and then Richard found out. They promised to help me get out of debt, on the condition that I sided with them." I listened, feeling that each word was a piece of the puzzle I had tried to solve on so many sleepless nights. Michael recounted, his voice trembling, how Jessica and Richard had manipulated him, taking advantage of his desperation to drag him into their plan. "They said you just needed to sign the power of attorney and everything would be fine," he said, his gaze fixed on the table. "I never thought they would hurt you. I wanted to save my family. I stayed quiet, but inside I was boiling with a mix of rage and pain." Family? Was the family he was talking about Jessica and Lily, or was it me, the mother who had given her whole life for him? I wanted to ask, but Michael continued, his voice breaking. "I never wanted you to die. I didn't know anything about the nurse or the life insurance. They told me to leave it in their hands. If I had known they planned to harm you, I never would have agreed." He collapsed onto the table, tears falling and soaking the wood. His words tore at my soul. I wanted to believe. I wanted to think that Michael hadn't done it intentionally, that he too was just another victim of the Davises. But the wound of betrayal was still there, open, bleeding. I remembered his cold look in front of the house door. I remembered his silence when Jessica threw me out. Could these apologies erase everything I had lost? A gentle tap on the glass interrupted my thoughts. Detective Miller appeared, signaling that there were only 5 minutes left. I looked at Michael, saw him lift his head, his eyes red with regret. I opened my purse and took out an old, carefully sealed envelope that I had kept since William's death. "Read this," I said, pushing the envelope towards him. "Your father wrote it before he died. He always believed you would do the right thing." Michael, with trembling hands, opened the envelope and took out a yellowed sheet of paper. I knew every line, because I had read it hundreds of times. William had written, "Michael, my dear son, I know you have a good heart, even if you sometimes take the wrong path. Life isn't easy, but you will always have your mother, who loves you more than anyone. Whatever happens, remember that family is the place you return to, the place of forgiveness and love. I trust that you will always choose to do the right thing, because you are your mother's son and mine. Be strong, and don't let greed or fear cloud your judgment. I will always be with you, even when I'm no longer here." Michael read, and the tears began to fall on the page, blurring William's words. His voice broke, his shoulders trembled, as if the letter had awakened something very deep within him. When he looked up, he saw me with eyes full of remorse. "I'm going to confess everything," he said, his voice shattered. "I'll accept going to prison to pay for my mistakes, as long as one day you can forgive me." His words were like one last stab, but not to wound me, but to open a wound that needed to heal. I looked at Michael and saw in him the shadow of the boy who used to run after me in the garden, who would hug me crying when he fell. But I also saw the man who chose to side with Jessica, who allowed them to kick me out of the house. I stood up, didn't answer, just nodded slightly. I didn't know if I could ever forgive, but I wanted him to know that I still saw him, my son, even if he had taken the wrong path. Michael looked at me as the police led him away, his eyes filled with regret. The metal door closed, and the creak sounded like a final period to our meeting. 1 month after confronting Michael at the detention center, I sat in the courtroom, my hands gripping the edge of the wooden bench, my gaze fixed on the judge, reading the verdict. The light coming through the window highlighted the dust particles floating in the air, as if the entire room was holding its breath. "Jessica Davis." The judge's voice boomed, firm and solemn. 20 years in prison for fraud, conspiracy to commit theft, and attempted murder. I closed my eyes, as if a huge stone had been lifted from my chest. Then he continued with Richard Davis. 18 years in prison for running the fraud ring. Barbara Davis, 15 years for complicity. And finally, Susan Martin, the nurse who tried to deliberately infect me, 8 years in prison for illegal medical practices. When they named Michael, my heart sank. Michael Wallace, the judge said, 3 to 5 years in prison, with a reduced sentence for cooperating as a witness against the Davis family. I bowed my head. Tears fell silently. My son, the son I had loved my whole life, now had to pay for his mistakes. But deep down, there was a sense of relief. He had decided to tell the truth. He had chosen to side with justice, even if it was late. When the trial ended, I stood up and left the courtroom, with the feeling that a painful chapter of my life had closed, although the wound was still fresh. Weeks later, after the police had concluded their investigations, I returned to the house on Magnolia Lane. The old wooden door had been painted a warm brown shade, just how William liked it. I pushed the door and walked in. The scent of roses from the garden wafted in, soft as a greeting. The house was the same, but it was no longer the same home. The walls that had held the laughter of Michael as a child, the nights when William read the newspaper at the table, were now just memories. I stood in the living room, took a deep breath, holding back tears. This was my house. I had gotten it back, but the price had been too high. Helen arrived one morning with a box full of nails and a hammer. "We need to hang the family photos back up, Carol," she said, smiling. I nodded, and together we opened the cardboard box I had brought from the hotel. A photo of Michael at 5 years old, hugging me tightly in the park with a radiant smile. Another from my wedding day with William, his eyes looking at me with tenderness. We hung each photo on the wall, and with each nail, I felt like I was rebuilding a piece of myself. One afternoon, I heard a knock on the door. Outside were Mrs. Miller and the Peterson family, with a tray of homemade pastries that smelled of cinnamon. "Carol, we are so grateful to you, Mrs. Miller said, her eyes filled with tears. "If it weren't for you, this neighborhood would be lost by now, Mr." Peterson nodded, took his wife's hand, and added in a grave voice, "You gave us hope back, Carol. You are our hero." I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest, as if the winter sun had touched me. "I just did the right thing," I replied, inviting them in. We sat around the table and shared stories about the neighborhood, just like in the old days. A few days later, Diane Fisher, a neighbor who had recently moved in, knocked on the door. "Mrs. Wallace, I'm organizing a reading at the university this weekend," she said with an enthusiastic voice. "Would you like to come with us? I think you'll like it." I hesitated for a moment, but Diane's sincere look made me nod. "All right, I'll go." It was the first time I had stepped out of my own confinement, participating in community activities, talking to strangers who, nevertheless, made me feel alive again. I started getting more involved, from neighborhood meetings to volunteer classes, as if each step was a way of healing my internal wounds. One day, while I was with Helen at our usual coffee shop, I told her about the idea of creating a legal support fund for elderly victims of financial abuse. "I want to call it the William Wallace Foundation," I said, my voice trembling, "to honor his memory and so that people like me, like Mrs. Miller, don't have to fight alone." Helen took my hand, her eyes shining. "That's a wonderful idea, Carol. I will help you make it a reality." Months later, the fund was inaugurated in a small ceremony at the community center. I stood in front of the microphone, looking at the familiar faces of the Magnolia neighborhood and also new people who had come to support. "No one should have to fight alone," I said, my voice choked but firm. "Justice is not just for me, but for all those who were once stripped of their voice. I lost many things, but I found myself, and I want to help others do the same." The applause filled the room, and I saw Mrs. Miller wipe away her tears, Diane smiling, and Helen nodding with pride. That night, I sat in the backyard, with the candlelight glowing next to William's portrait. The soft scent of the roses reminded me of the happy days we had shared. I ran my fingers over the photo and whispered, "Thank you for giving me the strength to keep the house and to find myself." Tears ran down my face, but this time they were not just of pain. They were of liberation, of hope, of knowing that I had done the right thing, that I had survived the storm and become stronger. In that instant, I knew he was smiling at me from somewhere. The story we tell is fictional, but it is based on some real events. The names and places have been changed to protect the identity of those involved. We don't tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence inside their own homes? I'm genuinely curious. If it were you, in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace? Or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your voice? I want to know what you think, because every story is a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I firmly believe that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the final screen, I leave you with two of the channel's most beloved stories. I assure you they will surprise you. Thank you for staying until the end.